Clarence Lawson Wood was born in 1878 in Highgate, London, the oldest of 4 children. His father was the landscape artist Lewis Pinhorn Wood, and his grandfather Lewis John Wood had been an architectural artist. So it wasn't much of a surprise when the young Clarence demonstrated an obvious talent for drawing, which only grew stronger throughout his youth. He studied at both the Slade School of Fine Art and Heatherley's School of Art, and also took evening classes at Frank Calderon's School of Animal Painting. But somewhat confusingly, it's also recorded that at the age of 18 in 1896, he took a job as an illustrator for the publisher C. Arthur Pearson, a friend of his father's. So it seems likely he was having ongoing art training while simultaneously working as a professional illustrator. His work appeared regularly in Pearson's magazine and even less imaginatively titled sister publication Short Stories. He'd always disliked the name Clarence, and for a while he signed his work as Stanley L. Wood, before becoming Lawson Wood a year or 2 later. What he didn't get to do at this stage of his career was work in colour or demonstrate his enviable facility for humour. So in 1902 he left the company to pursue a freelance career, and in the same year he married fashion illustrator Charlotte Forge. The couple went on to produce 3 children. It seems he transitioned into the life of a freelance illustrator with little, if any, difficulty, and his work was soon being published in a range of popular British magazines, including The Graphic, The Strand, Punch, the Illustrated London News and The Bystander. Early on in his freelance career he developed an idea originally created some years earlier by Punch cartoonist E.T. Reed. This was Prehistoric Peeps, a series of comical depictions of cavemen and women seen through the lens of contemporary society. Wood hijacked this concept and ran with it in his own inimitable style. Some were printed as monochrome, but most were reproduced in full colour, and for the first time the real qualities of his ability with watercolour and good-natured humour could be appreciated. And in 1907 his book of prehistoric proverbs was published, and it was very warmly welcomed by the British public. Unlike many other illustrators, Wood was also an astute businessman, and from early in his career he not only made sure he retained the copyright in his work, but also found ways to exploit the earning potential of his illustrations beyond magazine publication, by reusing them in other formats such as postcards, books, and as mass-market prints to be hung on the wall of British households. He rapidly developed a repertory company of quintessential British characters, including tubby policemen, miscreant children, unsuccessful huntsmen and timid clergymen. The painted skill and characterisation he brought to all this work made him one of the most successful illustrators of the period. In 1909 he got yet more mileage from his caveman characters with an agreeably absurd children's book, The Brontos and the Tootledbird, written by Alice Raker. And although he didn't often get involved with advertising, he did create this comic poster for a brewery in 1910. And in the same year, this collection of policemen was also reused to sell beer. In 1912, Wood was one of a group of illustrators commissioned to create monochrome page illustrations for the Bow Wow book, a collection of canine stories and verses by Coulson Kernahan. And with the financial success he had enjoyed, in that year Wood and his family moved into a 15th century manor house, Court Lodge, near Tunbridge Wells in Kent, having first had it moved brick by brick from its original location in Sussex. In 1914, Wood made his debut in the USA with a cover and some colour page illustrations for the humour magazine Puck. But in the same year, Britain declared war on Germany, and within a year, at the age of 37, he served in the highly dangerous role of flying in a hot air balloon to relay the location of enemy strongholds below. Not only did he manage to not get shot down, but was decorated for bravery by the French. And he somehow found the time to create a couple of patriotic recruitment posters in an appropriately non-humorous, somewhat antiseptic style. But even more incredibly, given that he was risking his life for king and country, he continued to create other more humorous images, even if at an understandably reduced rate. Among these was a series of full-colour cartoons making good-natured fun of England's notoriously tight-fisted northern neighbours, the Scots. The earliest example of him using apes as a subject for comic effect was also published during the war, in the form of this remarkably expressive painted piece. In 1916, a slim volume of monochrome cartoons titled Splinters, which consisted of reprints of illustrations originally published in the Sketch and the Illustrated News, was published. And in the same year, he made his debut as a writer of children's books with his pocket-sized collection known as the Mr. Books. These amusing little stories successfully showcased his enviable abilities with endearing anthropomorphic animals, and they sold in large numbers. Once the war was over, he created another series along similar lines, published in 1919. This time around, for obvious reasons, they were collectively known as the Mrs. Books, and they matched the success of the earlier collection. Wood and his family relocated at this time to another manor house in the village of Cranleigh, Surrey, and in addition to his freelance work, he was featured in Percy Bradshaw's series of publications, The Art of the Illustrator, with examples of how he created his images. By this time, depictions of comic animals clearly dominated his output, and another series titled Rummy Tales was published in 1920. Each book, which he also wrote, featured a particular animal in the title role, with a strong supporting cast of others for comic effect. The covers were in full colour, and so were some of the interior pages, although there were just as many reproduced as duotones. In the same year, the book Jolly Rhymes was published, for which he shared illustration duties with his contemporary and rival G.E. Studdy, with a collection of suitably humorous colour images for the amusement of adult readers. The New Zoo Tales appeared in 1922, and this time around he created strange but likeable hybrid creatures with silly names as the protagonists for each book, although there were other more recognisable animals and even some human characters featured in the narratives. It was also an early example of his work being used as a tool for advertising, in this case the drink Ovaltine, which was said to help children sleep well. And all these series were also published in the USA, further extending the reach of his popularity. In the mid-1920s, the Woods moved again to Eastbourne in East Sussex, but into each life some rain must fall, and in 1929 his wife Charlotte filed for divorce. But in contrast, his career could not have been going better, and around this time Wood appeared for the first time on the cover of Collier's magazine in the USA. And such was the success of his illustrations of comical animals sharply defined against white backgrounds, he quickly became a regular feature. Apes and monkeys had long featured in his work, and early in the decade, his elderly bald-headed ginger-coloured chimp character Grandpop made his debut in Britain in the Sketch magazine. Why he was ginger rather than the expected near black of the actual animal, I have no idea. But whatever his peculiarities, Grandpop and his extended family and animal friends would soon take over their creator's life and career. The book Lawson Wood's Funfair was published at this time, featuring a collection of humorous animal illustrations. And although Grandpop wasn't the only character featured, he and his ape relatives made several appearances alongside a whole host of others, making for a particularly amusing and engaging picture book. As the title suggests, the old nursery rhymes published in 1933 showcase Wood's prowess with a series of lightly comic and visually absorbing watercolour illustrations of traditional nursery rhymes. And although naturally enough there were some animal characters as dictated by the verses, it was what was by now a relatively uncommon diversion into the portrayal of human characters, however fanciful. Many had of course already used these rhymes as a vehicle to display their work, and many more would do so later, but Wood's edition was certainly among the more memorable and enduring. Throughout the rest of the decade, no less than another 4 were published. Whether these were simply retitled versions or contained new images is unclear. The immense popularity of Grandpop and the merchandising of his work across Europe and the USA had made Wood an exceptionally wealthy man. And much to his credit, he spent a considerable portion of his wealth, along with his new partner Ethel Webb, establishing and maintaining an animal sanctuary. This earned him the fellowship of the Royal Zoological Society and the admiration of animal lovers everywhere. Throughout the 1930s, Grandpop and chums appeared in a wide range of contexts, from cigarette cards and postcards to calendars and any number of book collections. In 1940 there was even a rather inept stuffed toy of the character, which sold well to children despite its less than convincing likeness. Grandpop was every bit as popular with adults as with children wherever he appeared, and his success in the USA was such that several animated films were made by longtime Disney associate WWII Works, although, as is frequently the case, neither the character designs or backgrounds could compete with Wood's originals. Following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and America's entry into the war, Wood's images were harnessed regularly on the cover of Collier's magazine, combining slapstick humour and condemnation through mockery of the forces of the Axis. In addition, he produced a large volume of posters and other publicity for display in American factories and places of business, making eloquent reminders and warnings to ensure that everybody did their utmost to help the fighting men eventually conquer the enemy. In 1942, his house was destroyed by German bombs, but he was lucky enough not to be in residence at the time. And in 1943 alone, the bedtime picture book and Grandpop's Book of Fun were also published, and provided light-hearted relief from the grim realities of war for children and grown-ups alike. There was also the interactive book Heads and Tails, which had pages divided into three to create comical mismatched anatomy. Once the war had ended, he continued to publish yet more books, with two more Grandpop collections in 1946, and he remained a significant presence in the USA with more Grandpop and advertising work in the form of posters for the Ringling Brothers Circus and other American clients at this time. And Grandpop's adventures and misadventures also continue to be used to decorate commercial wall calendars. As the 1950s began, Lawson Wood's productivity fell sharply, and although there was no apparent loss of quality in the images printed, he was by this time in poor health. Officially, he retired to Sidmouth in Devon, but nevertheless continued to create amusing images almost to the end of his life, and he died at his home in 1957 at the age of 79. Considering the level of his success on both sides of the Atlantic during his lifetime, and the prosperity and fame it brought him, it's a bit of a mystery why Lawson Wood is not remembered as well as others of his generation. I struggle to think of another humorous illustrator who used watercolour and gouache with such precision and three-dimensional plausibility. His anthropomorphic skills were equally pronounced, and his harnessing of that skill to hold a gentle satirical mirror up to our own behaviour in such a vast collection of cheerful and familiar situations couldn't be equalled by anyone I can think of. In my research I came upon this quote from a certain C.M. Kelly in his 1975 book about other illustrators, in which he makes a passing reference to a watercolour by Wood as a welcome holiday from the prehistoric monsters and chimpanzees on which he wasted so much talent. I'm not a violent man, but on behalf of myself and the millions Lawson Wood has entertained with his illustrations, I would take the greatest of pleasure in kicking C.M. Kelly in the seat of his pompous pants.